Okay, good morning. I'd like to convene the Wednesday, November 29th meeting of the Elderly Nutrition Program Task Force. We'll kick things off with remarks by the chairs. Before the recording, I just wanted to wish everybody a very happy, hope that everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. Welcome folks back, and I will turn it over to well, actually, before I turn it over to my co-chair, I do want to just say that we are looking at scheduling and figuring out how we can move towards potential consensus ways to improve the program. So my real hope is that today we'll be able to start talk on potential options moving forward. And I think we see some of that on the agenda for today. But before we get into the meat of things, I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Representative Gilchrist, for any opening remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator Lesser. I will be on screen shortly, just coming back from teaching a class. I just want to echo what the good senator said in terms of I hope folks had a really nice holiday. And then just want to thank you all for the amount of work that you put into the conversation for today's meeting. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other? I don't see the ranking members on. So with that out of the way, let's go right into the agenda. We have on item number 3 on the agenda, approval of the minutes from the October 25th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Representative Gilchrist, second by Joel Sikorsky. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll try your minds. All those in favor of adopting the minutes say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, nay. Not seeing any nays. The minutes are adopted. Moving on to item number 4 on the agenda, review of follow-up questions from the AAAs and from ADS. And I do think we just got this follow-ups from ADS sent out to you this morning. So I'm not sure if folks have had an opportunity to look at those, but we did send out the follow-up questions from AAAs earlier. Have folks all received those?
Yes.
Okay, great. Perhaps we can go through those. Let me just pull them up on my end as well.
Senator, I'm happy to share my screen too if needed.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, if you don't mind. I think that's a great way to do this. Now, in terms of walking through this, is there a representative from oh no, that's the okay, yeah. Does a representative from the AAAs want to walk us through that, or should we just go straight into Q&A? The first question was about when on average during the fiscal year for the last 5 years, both before and after COVID, do the AAAs receive Title III funding? So that could either be at the start of the fiscal year or when funds have been received by the State Unit on Aging. And so one question is about the cash flow issue. So it depends. Does somebody from the AAAs just want to walk us through this?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Senator Lesser. It's Marie.
Yeah.
Okay, we have 2 different scenarios. First, the beginning of the federal fiscal year, which begins October 1. Because a budget is not in place on the federal level, or because the federal Administration of Community Living has not responded to the State Unit on Aging yet, we have a delay. Right now, there is still no budget. We're working off a continuing resolution. The continuing resolution does not give the State Unit on Aging enough money to give us the money we need at the start of the year. These delays, as you saw in the response from the State Unit on Aging. They typically do not get the budget information until February for a year that began October of the previous year. So they are getting notification in October. October is the start of the new fiscal year, and they received notification about the award in February of 24 for a year that began October in 2023. That creates the largest delay and the strongest cash flow issue. Once the State Unit on Aging has information about the funds available, it will take them another couple of weeks to take the total dollars given to Connecticut and determine how to allocate it among the 5 area agencies on aging. At that point, the AAAs are allowed to request funding. That request goes in, and it can take at least 45 days per the contract, but in reality, it is often closer to 60 days for the funds to actually get to the AAA. So we have October, November, December, January, February, March, and sometimes into April before we have funds to begin paying on the contract that began October. Other times of the year, once the budget is set and they know how much money they're getting, other times of the year, it typically takes approximately 60 days from the time the AAA requests the funds. We can only request funds when we have expended 75% of the funds they gave us previously. This causes an immediate problem because by the time we request the funds, we already need them, and we know that their finance department can take up to 2 months to get that money to us. For a AAA that does not have any cash flow, that creates a problem, which delays payment to the nutrition provider.
Great, thank you. Are there? I guess we can hold questions to the end unless there's something that's super burning. Why don't we go down the second item on the agenda? The second question.
The second question asks, once we get the money, how quickly can we turn it around? And depending on if the elderly nutrition provider is desperate, if they are waiting, we will try and do it that same day. On average, it will take about a week, 5 days.
So the third item?
This goes back to when can a AAA request funding from the State Unit on Aging? And again, we must expend 75% of the funds they give us. In round numbers, they're going to give us about a quarter of the entire year's payment at a time. If they give us about a quarter and I have to wait until I expend 75%, I'm already in that third month by the time I'm making the request. If it takes them an additional 60 days to get payment to me, I am already behind in my payments to the nutrition program. So this is one of the efficiencies that I believe the Connecticut action agencies submitted this morning that we just received minutes before the task force, where we're looking at how can we more efficiently make this process work. I think we definitely have to go back and take a look at that 75% requirement, because that requirement ensures that the AAAs get money after we need them to pay the receivable to the nutrition provider. So hopefully that's something we can work through on solutions.
Great. And I think we sort of talked about number 4. And in terms of number 5, do you want to talk about the processes that are arduous that complicate the submission?
Yeah, well, for the ENPs, the reports are very time consuming. Those Form 5s are difficult for them to get to us, and we are paying on invoice. In other words, we're paying the nutrition providers based on the claims that they are able to get into us in a timely fashion by the 15th of the month following the month of service. So for October, their information is due to us by November 15th. Then we submit our financial reports to the State Unit on Aging with any request for payment. There's often multiple back and forth conversations between the State Unit on Aging and the AAAs that I think we can certainly streamline before an additional award is sent. And again, that 75% of funds expended puts us behind the 8 ball before we can even request funds. Item 6 is talking about the administrative portion of the funds that come into the state. The AAAs receive 10% for the work that they do in allocating funding out to the state. That 10% includes requirements around gathering all the data from all of the nutrition providers, making sure the nutrition providers have the correct forms and are filling out everything in keeping with the federal reporting requirements. The 10% is used in many cases to support elderly nutrition, to work with the providers to come up with a nutrition education plan every year. It's used to enter all the data. Every single person who gets a meal every single day has to be entered into a computer system that allows for reporting into the state. It includes the work that we do in requesting payments, in providing fiscal reports, in working with the ENPs to solve issues when a site perhaps is not performing, does not have individuals coming in to the site. We work also to check the temperatures of the Meals on Wheels routes. So all of those things are included in the 10% administrative fee that the AAA receives. The RFP process is established by the area agencies on aging, but the RFP is always reviewed by the State Unit on Aging. We make sure that all of the proper citations are in the RFP. How are evaluators of the RFP process selected? The area agencies on aging have very strict rules about making sure that their boards are representative of the community. So boards and advisory councils come from the communities we serve. And from that pool, we ask for volunteers who will serve on the RFP commissions and review all of the materials and come up with an awardee. We do a thorough review of conflicts, making sure that the individual has no connection to any of the potential providers. And we ask them to complete a conflict of interest statement, which is kept as part of the RFP process. Because nutrition is so complex, we will sometimes bring in a volunteer, someone who was involved, maybe a former restaurant owner or a retiree who can help provide some additional guidance in the RFP. But all RFPs, whether it's nutrition or other elderly services in the community, are reviewed by a representative board, representatives of the board and advisory council, and then their recommendations go to the boards at large in each of the 5 regions. Their recommendations are reviewed, voted on, and then implemented. The tool and scoring sheets had been submitted as part of the FOIA. I did attach them again for anyone to review. The evaluation tools really just take a look at the quality, the cost of the food, and the ability to manage the process. Those are the 3 main functional areas that are reviewed during the evaluation. The evaluators are trained in the tool. We talk about the difference between subjectivity and objectivity, which goes down to question number 13. We make sure that we know the difference between, we get a lot of survey information from the sites, and you can take 5 sites and have 5 different favorite meals, 5 different favorite serving times. So that is really subjective, and we try not to allow too much of that to get into the evaluation. We're looking more at the things we can look at objectively. Are they meeting their targets? Are we targeting those underserved, low-income minority participants that Older Americans Act dollars need? Are the sites overall happy with the meals that they're receiving? Is there a good partnership and collaboration between the site, the host site, and the nutrition provider? Those are the things that we're looking at. Efficiencies. We'd love to, we're working hopefully to get a grant so that we can use technology in our favor and stop passing thousands of sheets of papers back and forth, which are subject to loss and also subject to trying to read people's handwriting. It will greatly increase the efficiency of getting claims data to the AAAs, which allows us to get payment to the ENPs more quickly. The State Unit on Aging could reduce the length of the Form 5. This is a real barrier. They have added a second assessment. I'm not quite sure why on the nutrition forms that is above and beyond what the Older Americans Act is asking for. Someone suggested the use of POUR, rather than using submissions to the State Unit on Aging Finance Department. That may or may not be possible based on the fact that these are federal funds, so I don't know if that is a true possibility. Allowing the AAAs to request additional funding once 25% of the funds are expended rather than 75% would increase by almost 60 days our receipt of the funds and thereby our ability to pay the receivable. The Connecticut Home Care Program for elders could be paid at a uniform reimbursement rate and increased reimbursement rate so that the nutrition providers who are providing, which are almost all of them, providing both Medicaid waiver meals as well as Title III meals, are not inclined to cost shift, taking some of their expenses that are not reimbursed through the Connecticut Home Care Program and pushing them over to Title III. We could look at other food security options, more widespread use of SNAP, and alternative sources for meals like medically tailored meals through Medicare reimbursement is another way of getting additional Connecticut residents fed through these meal programs. Area plans, I believe, is what the question was referring to. How do we put together our area plans? Are done every 3 years, occasionally 4 years. Stakeholder feedback is received through focus groups. We are required to hold focus groups. We get a lot of survey information every year from all of our grantees. We also do a literature and white paper review to make sure that our area plans represent the needs of our communities. Before final approval, we have a public hearing and we put that in the newspaper, on our websites. We reach out to all of the programs that we provide funding for, and we ask for their input. Our advisory council, so also our ambassadors out in the community. As I said, they are representative of the community. It's wonderful to engage our federal congressional delegation. I know the congressional delegation is very supportive of Meals on Wheels. Rosa DeLauro in particular has done a lot of work for the Older Americans Act and the Elderly Nutrition Program, as have many others within the delegation. I think keeping them abreast of the struggles we have with food security in Connecticut is a wonderful thing, and anything they can do to increase the allocation would be much appreciated. The AAAs do that on a very regular basis within our own regions. We work with the aides from the congressional offices to give them updates on how Older Americans Act dollars are spent, what the greatest needs are in the state, and just the overall climate here in Connecticut for older adults.
Okay. That's the end, right? Or is there?
I believe so.
Okay.
So,
Great. So before we get to the next item, which is ADS, do we have comments or questions certainly want to get into the recommendations for sure. But are there specific questions from other folks about the responses we got from the AAAs?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill.
I was first off, thank you very much for, I think that, the document did a good highlighting of some of the brokenness in the system that we talked about, especially around the, the payment processing and delays. My question, I think you kind of alluded to it about the Form 5, but my question was around why additional information it was required, and was there a time when it just lined up with the minimum that's required by OAA?
Yeah, Joel, you may have to help me here. I think it was 3 years ago, but it could have been 2 years ago that that the State Unit on Aging created an additional 8 or 9 questions, a new assessment that was added to the original Form 5. And I can remember being in meetings with you, Joel, and with many of my colleagues, where we asked the State Unit on Aging to reconsider this, that it was a tremendous burden, and also that some of the questions were actually, well, I don't want to say damaging, but they were difficult for the individuals responding because they would ask things about, do you have enough money for food, in 3 or 4 different ways, so that the person was feeling almost embarrassed by the questions and found it difficult to complete. I believe, Joel, do you remember the time frame on that?
Yeah, my notes on one of these was that it was definitely pre-COVID. I'm thinking it was like 8 years ago, really, because the time has just flown by so quickly. I do remember to echo what you said, we were very concerned about that, primarily in the congregate piece too. They felt that it was really intrusive and that it was very redundant at the time. I'm not really sure. I mean, there's been a complete turnover at the state unit pretty much, except Margie since then. And I remember being in the stakeholder meetings when we used to meet at Cafe 55 or in the building that had Cafe 55 in the bottom. That was a big concern for us then, and we just couldn't. There was never really a good reason provided, other than it would help the state go after better data for the long run. Why it was done and why they expanded the present requirements, which were really minimal at the time, and the other questions were asked during the full assessment for home delivered. So I do remember it, but I don't remember why we got a full, why it stuck.
I think Aaron wanted to respond, and then I want to get to Representative Gilchrist.
I want to speak to the timing, because I do remember when the timing, I wasn't here, but I do remember the timing. It was for federal fiscal year 22, Marie. So the new Form 5 went into effect 10/1/2021.
Representative Gilchrist?
Yeah, wait, just to add on to that, that's when it went into effect, but we were dealing with it for several years before that. And I think CANASP actually opened that can of worms back in my time frame, is we were trying to improve the Form 5 to the point where we needed it on our level, which was emergency contact wasn't on that at that time. And there was a couple of things that we utilized within our functionality that we were trying to add to it. And by doing that, it evolved over that time period. And I'm not disagreeing with Aaron on that, but it was a conversation that lasted several years. And we had many Form 5s go back and forth. And then when it finally did come back, we were looking for, at max a front and back page, and it came back almost bigger than that. So that's my memory. I could be inaccurate in a couple of things.
Representative Doris?
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for this information. In particular, I was struck by how long it takes to get the funds out, and it was helpful to have you all walk us through that process. My question about it is, the 75% expended a state requirement, or is that part of the federal requirements?
That's a state requirement, Representative Jillian Gilchrist. We actually, it's relatively new. It started 2 years ago. So prior to that, we were not required to have the 75%. I'm not sure what happened at the State Unit on Aging to indicate the change. Perhaps Erin knows, I don't know.
And since that change went through, has that, it seems it, but I just want to confirm, has that caused bigger issues?
Yes, the issue at the start of the fiscal year, because of the late notification from the federal government, has always been there. I've been in my position for 17 years, and it has always been a beginning of the year issue. Having that issue all year long occurred when we started with the 75% requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? I'd love to, love to sort of push Erin. We'd love to hear more from ADS about your potential responses to this, but maybe we could go and go to your answers first, and then circle back about the recommendations. All right.
Chandra,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Who was that?
I was going to ask Chandra to put them up, and she did. So, all right. So I'll just run through these. The first question you can see, and Marie alluded to, talks about when the actual funding has been received historically over the last 5 years. Every one of the last 5 federal fiscal years, there's been a continuing resolution in place, sometimes 2, until we get to the large award, and that's usually in February. So you can see the dates there. In terms of when the state receives the funds, typically what happens is we receive the notice of award from the Administration for Community Living. ADS Fiscal reviews the notice of awards, talks to OPM, makes sure that we are funded, and then prepares the allocation chart. And then the allocation chart goes out to the area agencies on aging. Typically that's been about 2 weeks between the notice of award and the funds being able to be requested. Again, that comes down to when the notice of award is sent to the state. So even if the new federal fiscal year starts on October 1, it may be that we don't get a notice of award until the end of October or early November. The 25% execution payment, I do want to note that is for the beginning of a contract period. It's not for the beginning of each federal fiscal year. And unfortunately, because we typically don't have the full funds available to us at the beginning of the federal fiscal year, which would be the beginning of the contract, that payment is problematic. And typically, and the last contract renewal we had was in late 2020, and it was not immediately available. Number 4, the required steps. Marie went through a lot of this from the AAA side, but once the continuing resolution or the budget is in place and the AAA receives their allocation, they can make those requests for payment with the invoice and the expenditure reports showing that the right now the 75% has been expended, and then ADS has the 45 days to make payment. So in terms of the funds being distributed, if we're talking about the allocations and how each AAA gets a specific amount of funds, that comes down to the interstate funding formula. This was explained in in quite a bit more detail in the legislative report that was sent out. But basically, the interstate funding formula, which is prescribed by the Older Americans Act and ACL, looks at the proportion of older adults in a region, weights that according to Older Americans Act target priority populations, and then that weighted percentage determines how much of the funding each of the 5 area agencies on aging get. Number 6 of the total allocation, what percentage goes to the area agencies on aging. The ADS does retain administrative funds and ombudsman funds in accordance with the Older Americans Act. The rest of it goes to the AAAs, and that's usually between 85 and 90% of the funding goes to the AAAs for distribution to all service providers.
So I apologize, just for clarification. So you get a 10 to 15% administrative fee, an ombudsman fee, and then based on what we just heard, it sounds like another 10% of the remainder then gets withheld by the AAAs. So
yes, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just curious. My math's a little rusty this morning, but what percentage of the overall funding is actually expended on food then, in terms of or on?
So when we talk about Older Americans Act funding and the 85 to 90%, that's all Title III. So that's supportive services, nutrition services, health promotion programs, and National Family Caregiver. So it's spread across those. So for nutrition specifically, it works out to, I would honestly have to go back and look at it because certain funds are taken out of certain places. I'm happy to get that information for you, but I don't have it immediately and I don't want to misspeak.
Okay.
OA?
I just wanted to jump into that question. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll get that answer for you. Number 7, do Title III funds need to be administered through the area agencies on aging? Yes, that is an Older Americans Act requirement. There was a time when the state would contract directly with elderly nutrition providers, and that was true of all states. That was changed back in the 70s, I believe. And the OAA set up the structure that all funding had to go from the SUA to the AAAs for services. Our role in monitoring and oversight of the area agencies on aging. Again, our relationship, it's not solely about the nutrition program. It's a whole variety of programs. So we do regular, we're responsible for planning and policy development and administration of the OAA activities. So we coordinate programs, we do technical assistance to the AAAs and their subcontractors. We monitor all of the management information systems and coordinate the database. And then we do obviously program and AAA monitoring to ensure compliance with federal, state program and contract regulations. As part of the Older Americans Act, we do also do a multi-year state plan, which lays out the objectives for older adults across the state, which we work on in conjunction with the area agencies on aging and helps inform the area agency on aging area plans that they also do. Regular program performance and financial monitoring is done, yes. We do quarterly monitoring of a lot of our programs for both this financial and programmatic goals. We do regular data monitoring in our MIS system. Obviously, fiscal monitoring is done both through audits and as part of the regular expenditure reporting. All expenditure reports are looked at and monitored. And then we also do site visits with our AAAs. We can monitor subcontracts and things like that as well. So number 10. The scope or process for the monitoring visits, obviously, we're looking, like I said, at MIS data for completeness and accuracy, any subcontractor contracts or agreements, state single audit findings are reviewed on a yearly basis, and any findings, if there are any, are addressed, and then obviously financial data related to federal or state funding. Review and approval of the procurement and RFP process. The State Unit on Aging does review the RFP once it's drafted and makes any recommendations to either change language, tighten up language. So it's referring to, so it's meeting the OAA requirements and our state procurement requirements, and make those recommendations to the AAAs before the RFP goes out. We don't audit the RFP process per se. We do review the draft RFP, and then we may get involved if there is an appeal. Are the area agencies on aging subject to reviews by the State Contracting Standards Board? They have the authority to consider subcontracts of state procurements within the guidance of guidelines of the board and any applicable state regulations. The contractual relationship between the area agencies on aging and their grant subcontractors. We do review subcontracts to ensure that they meet the requirements of the programs and that everybody's in compliance with any applicable laws or regulations they need to be in compliance with. What can be done differently to create efficiencies in the administrative process of the elderly nutrition program? Obviously, we're looking at all the recommendations that folks are making. We do have nutrition services stakeholder meetings, which are to help move towards some of those efficiencies. And we have, in the past done things like doing combined nutrition education plans. And we are obviously open to feedback and open to suggestions to create some of those efficiencies. And then the annual plan, we do stakeholder listening sessions. We will submit the draft plan for comment, for public comment. We obviously work with the AAAs to identify areas of needs within regions. We do in some ways have to speak to ACL priority areas when we're doing the state plan. So we do sort of put out there what the ACL is looking at as priority areas, and then we receive feedback on that. And in terms of engaging the federal congressional delegation, we can't make a specific recommendation about doing that. We, from the ADS side, we do regularly meet with our regional coordinator at the Administration for Community Living and communicate anything we're hearing, any concerns to ACL, but we can't make any recommendations specifically about reaching out to congressional delegations.
Okay, and while we have you, do you want to, has ADS had a chance to review the specific recommendations made by the AAAs about, their suggestions about how to streamline the process?
So I have not had a huge amount of time with the new one that came out today.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the AAA recommendations have been out for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah, in terms of the payment processing, as I mentioned on our last meeting, we are aware that this is a concern. The deputy commissioner is actively involved in looking at our fiscal processes and our payment processes, and we are very motivated to shore up those issues. And if nothing else at this point, stay within the 45 days. And then we will be looking at the processes going forward. The recommendation for the 75%, we are actively looking at, and as we are doing contract amendments and talking to the AAAs, we are going to be considering some of those recommendations. We are motivated to work on some of the payment issues. In terms of the federal allocations and the federal budget process, it is a problem. It's very concerning. Unfortunately, as I said, we do speak with our ACL regional coordinator on a regular basis. They're well aware that it's a problem, but it's a much bigger problem than just an ACL problem.
Well, and I would love to, if anybody on the task force has a solution for how to keep Congress from shutting down periodically and, consistently have a speaker and whatnot, I would, I'm sure we could pass that on to our federal partners. But, I know specifically, we have it seems like we have two different issues, and one of them we just experienced with the August and September payments being delayed, and that obviously had nothing to do with Congress, since that was for the previous budget. So strengthening our internal payment structures would seem to at least help there. Does ADS have a position, or is this really only for OPM about potentially? I don't know if other states front the money. I know we don't know exactly what. I mean, do we generally know how much we're going to get, or does it really change that dramatically year in, year out? Obviously, we don't want to expose the state to significantly?
So I can say that funding has been largely flat. Federal funding has been largely flat over the last however many years. It would be a question for OPM rather than ADS about about fronting any money.
Okay. And just with regard to the question that I interrupted you about in the middle of your presentation, I did do some math, and I think it's something like 76.5% based on what you said, if depending on whether it's 15 or 10%, would be passed on to the service providers. But then I assume they also take a administrative haircut on top of that as well. So I'm still interested in figuring out how much of this fund, how much of these funds are actually expended on, direct services as opposed to, I'm not saying we don't need administrative costs, obviously we do, but just trying to get an understanding of what that would look like overall. Representative Gilchrist.
Great, thank you. Just wondering, Aaron, do you know the agency history of why you moved to the 75%? Like what were the goals?
I believe it was related to an audit finding, but I would have to check and get a better answer for you on that.
All right, that'd be great, because it would just be interesting to know what was the goal and did it help on your agency side, or
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. And then I still think it might be helpful if we consulted with DSS, Department of Social Services, because with LIHEAP, they what is that called now? I'm blanking. What in the world? They hold on to some money so that they can pay, like knowing that the money's going to come in late. So I just wonder if we could speak to them to see what model they use and how they're able to do that, because they've explained that's why, a lapse. That's why they have a lapse, because then they use that lapse money to cover the payments until the federal dollars come in.
I would just say generally, and Aaron, thanks for engaging on detail on those issues. I appreciate that ADS is looking at those questions and the questions we just received today from, or passed on today from the from CONASP. But my hope is that we can really identify specific recommendations in this task force that either go to ADS or to the legislature, depending on what we decide to do. But that's really that should be the goal of the task force. And so if we could get really specific feedback on where the department is and if there's specific obstacles or considerations that we should be aware of, I think that would be helpful. And I think we would need another meeting to get there, but it would be really helpful to hear where specifically they are, and if there are some issues that would prevent one of the removing the 75% threshold, for example. I want to make sure that we really have an opportunity to weigh those considerations. Do other folks have questions for Aaron?
Hi, this is Bill. I haven't figured out how to raise my hand, so I apologize for that. But
Okay.
I did have a couple. One is related to the funding formula. So just trying to make sure I understand. So 50% is equally distributed, and then the other 50 is weighted demographics. I'm wondering, is there any factor about actual service levels that's part of that formula, like prior service levels and activity?
There is not. The thinking behind the interstate funding formula is to target dollars to the areas of greatest need or greatest population, because under the Older Americans Act, we are supposed to be targeting those who are at the greatest economic and the greatest social need. So by looking at the demographics and looking at the folks who are in rural areas, who are disabled, who are otherwise socially isolated or economically isolated because they're in poverty, that's why the funds go out that way. And then within the regions, service providers should be targeting those folks specifically for the programs. So that's why it's set up the way it is.
All right, but there's no factor of actual services and people that service levels and people engaged throughout the region that's a part of that.
No.
Okay. And then the other is related to the contracts going required to go to the AAAs. I'm just wondering, was there some kind of special waiver that was given for, and maybe it is related to COVID and CARES and ARPA, where the EMPs have had direct contracts with aging and disability services for senior nutrition. We're in the process of executing agreements now, and did just something special have to be requested to make that happen, or?
So those were state American Rescue Plan Act funds. They were not Title or Older Americans Act funds. So there are some differences there, and there was a little bit more flexibility.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. And we didn't have this specifically on the agenda. So we've already gone into a little bit of 5 discussion of possible recommendations for the next legislative session. And seeing that on the agenda and seeing that both AAAs and ADS had provided follow-up questions, I encouraged CONASP to submit questions and recommendations as well. Bill, are you who's present? I'm sorry, if somebody could present those recommendations. Do you want to go forward with walking us through those?
Yeah, I can walk through the CAA one. That's the one that Lena and I had worked at. Yes, correct.
Okay, great.
Yep. So what we tried to do was really break this down into 4 areas, and then based on talking with our staff, based on the task force meetings and experience. So the first was looking at streamlining operations. So the first recommendation, looking at Connecticut's process for distributing the funds to the AAAs. Is there any efficiencies to improve timeliness or distributing these funds to AAAs and providers? Number 2, ensuring that the AAAs execute contracts with providers within 30 days of the contract start date. Recommendation 3, reducing the amount of information captured on the Form 5s to be in alignment with the minimum information required by federal funding agency. Recommendation 4, EMP staff entering Form 5 information directly into the grantee gateway with additional funds allocated to EMPs for this task. That was birthed out of these 2 were birthed out of the recommendations when the AAA responses. Recommendation 5, the State Union on Aging issues direct contracts with EMPs, and the State Union on Aging audit the AAA payment processes and selection of EMP providers. Recommendation number 6, external auditor or consulting firm is hired to conduct administrative analysis of processes to determine what efficiencies can be implemented by AAA's state aging office. And I neglected, it was also EMPs to improve contracting and payment process. I think that, the heart of this, I think, is the recognition and discussions, and I think has clearly been outlined in the AAA and aging responses, that we've got brokenness in the system that has to be addressed. I think that we all want to see things move forward in that arena. So we felt that streamlining operations was really one of the critical items. So the next section was payment processing. Recommendation number 1, issue an initial payment by leveraging state funds at the beginning of the program year equal to 60 days of expenditures. Recommendation number 2, we just talked about as part of the AAA recommendations, allow funds to be requested at 25% expended rather than the current 75% requirement. And then payments must be issued no greater than 30 days after a monthly reporting cycle, i.e. November payment issued by December 30th. Again, I think this, has really been highlighted, but, I think just needs to be come to the forefront. Providers, agencies on aging, we cannot continue to be 90, 120, 150 days or greater behind in payments on this program. It's just not, it is not sustainable for any one of the organizations. So that that's another, secondarily critical to seeing things move forward. Number 3, on the RFP process, recommendation including at least 2 members on the review panel have direct experience in operating elder nutrition programming or food service distribution. Recommendation number 2, ensuring uniformity and training across all AAA regions on the scoring evaluation tool. Recommendation number 3, ensure that state aging office reviews and signs off on the procurement process implemented by the Agency on Aging. And then, this could be, these last 2, we captured them under RFP just with the idea that, you would probably have to go out to RFP for these things, but, really maximize the buying power of EMPs through a discounted fuel rate, along the lines of what's currently available for municipal vehicles. And then maximize buying power of EMPs through a discounted raw food rate currently available through local education districts. And there might be others, but the bottom line is, being able to maximize that buying power to kind of reduce the major cost of this program, which is fuel, food, and then labor. And then moving to the last, the advocacy efforts. Recommendation number 1, convening a meeting of Connecticut's federal delegation, understand how the OAA funding comes to Connecticut to get a better understanding on the timing delay. Requesting an increase to an Older Americans Act funding that's sufficient to meet the unit cost of EMP provider agencies, which would be an additional $5.5 million annually. And then ensure that state funding to support EMPs is being leveraged to maximize federal reimbursement. So that was kind of the approach.
Great, thank you. There's a lot of there. So a lot of detail that we haven't previously talked about that I'd love to get into. I also understand that we've got some recommendations from Joel. Do you want to speak to that? And maybe we can then, if time allows, circle back to the recommendations we've got from Bill.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I'd like to start off by saying that both Bill and Lena's organizations are members of CANASP, which makes them ENPs, but not all ENPs are CAAs. So we all kind of go through the RFP process. Like an example would be Stan's group and my group. We're kind of municipalities, or we come from different areas, so we have different concerns and different ways that we have to operate and things. So, but strikingly, and I don't think by coincidence, we basically have 4 also. They're very similar to the same recommendations that Bill and Lena made, a little less detailed down. And so, we also think that the state could possibly, through OPM, make funds available in the interim while we're waiting for the federal money to come in. I picked from a hat that 80% from the prior year's federal contribution might be something that we could cap from the state of Connecticut. It would kind of be like a loan. I think we talked about that before. That's not any of us on this task force could do that, that would be an OPM decision, freeing up funds so that they would be made available on the premise that they would be paid back when the federal money came in.
We do have the
February.
ability, forgive me, I'm going to interrupt you, but
Sure.
we do have the ability, we've got some legislators on the, assuming we could, in theory, write a law that requires that. Obviously, we don't work with the administration on that, but it's not solely up to OPM's opinion is important, but it doesn't necessarily dictate what we do here.
Well, I like the sound of that, Senator Lesser. That sounds a lot cleaner. Like I said, I picked 80% knowing that the federal government generally doesn't cut our funding. And as Aaron alluded to before, it's been pretty much consistent. It goes up maybe 1% each year for their cost of living or whatever. So even without additional funding. I also some of the other things that they had made recommendations for the federal government, different areas. Some years the Senate, some years the House. They're always increasing our funds. The president's budget increases our funds, and then it gets voted down. So we need to do a better job on that as we go forward. Our number 2 is increased funding to the EMPs. I mean, the answer is always money. We need more money to do a better job. This will support, putting out a better product, the ongoing data, advocacy, all of those things get done when we have the proper amount of funding to do it. I don't think it's a secret that the quality of our product is in jeopardy between the food, the delivery costs, the labor, and just our overall capabilities. Without the proper amount of money, we can't do that. So unfortunately, money is always the answer, and the vehicles to get us there are what we're talking about. I think both Title III-C and the Connecticut Home Care Program need to be looked at all the time as properly funded. The Connecticut Home Care Program doesn't even have a vehicle for donations. So we just need to have more funding in there. Our number 3 is streamlining the process. I think they did a really good job, and the other recommendations and our conversations in these meetings have been very pointed to where we could make some similarities, maybe get things done by a better template or different opportunities like that to eliminate the redundancy. I think that part of the lag in our region anyway, I can't speak to every region and how every AAA does their business, is that we send them our MIS, which is our client reports, by a certain time every month. And then they have to verify that, and they have to make sure everyone's eligible and that the meals were actually served. If the assessment, to me, already makes those people eligible, and there could be a declining in the future. Maybe we could get paid right up front quicker for what we submit, and then as it gets scrutinized, we adjust in the prior month. Something like that could be done in a conversation, quite like the model that they use when we submit electronically our meals to the Connecticut Home Care Program. They'll decline some meals on certain lines, and then we have the opportunity to defend the reason that we billed them, and then it gets fixed in a prior month. So something to that nature would be in our recommendation. And again, these are more talking points at this point than formal recommendations, because we didn't get too elaborate in our meeting. I think we should also look at the Form 5, which has been mentioned several times today. I feel that the congregate one is very intrusive to people. They don't come back to the program because we're just asking too many questions in there. And I think we should go back towards, if possible, just the requirements that the Older Americans Act is asking, the actual bare minimum. I think that would be helpful to the process. It would get clean data, and I just think it would help the process. Our 5th is just basically a statement, more than a recommendation. I fear that our members in CanASP, that the EMPs at some point are going to be dropping their contracts and opting out of their provider status, just because of all of these things that we're talking about and the inability to continue to do business in the way that we do it. So, somehow perhaps we can acknowledge the reason for all of this is the gap between the costs and the funds available. And that historically client donation wasn't bad, but in the last decade or so, it's dropping. And fundraising has become so much more important, or finding other ways to get dollars in, and it's just not sustainable. Client donation has all but disappeared in reality. I mean, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of meals, and we're not even bringing in $100,000. So it doesn't matter if we ask for $50 or we ask for 50 cents. The people that know they don't have to make the donation don't make it anymore, and it's just becoming unsustainable. So that's the gist of our recommendations.
Thank you, Joel, and appreciate your suggestions as well as the suggestions from Bill. And your presentation sort of got me thinking. I was just at a recent meeting with some homeless services providers who were telling me that anecdotally they've seen a huge spike recently among elderly homeless folks, which didn't used to really be a problem, and Social Security and the systems were supposed to be able to take care of those folks. And so, I'm personally curious about what's happened that's put particular pressure on seniors across the state, that leading to their inability to provide any donation or etc. So I know what I'd like to do. So we were I'm going to fast forward and come back. So obviously one thing we have to do at every meeting is set the date and time of our next meeting. And we were looking at doing that in December 19th at 10 a.m. for our next meeting. And it's my hope that at that meeting we'll be able to, sort of drill these suggested recommendations down to specific recommendations, either for the next legislative session or administratively to our partners at ADS. I think it would be extremely helpful for ADS to look at all of the recommendations in some detail and report back to us prior to that December 19th meeting about their feasibility, so we can at that meeting really focus on what are our core priorities. Is there consensus that we can build, or something close to consensus on this task force? So that's an accelerated time frame, and I know we had been moving fairly slowly, but in order to get things ready for the next session, it would be great if we could get there on the 19th. If we can't, I suppose we could schedule another meeting after that, but it would be great to move quickly and figure out what we're going to be recommending going forward. So with that said, I was curious if the folks at the AAAs had having heard now what the providers are recommending, if you had questions or comments. I know that there was a lot to digest, and I had some specifically, there were questions about bulk purchasing and whatnot. That I'm curious about the feasibility of that. I have some questions about it, but do you have questions that you want to lead off for either Bill or for Joel?
I think that it's striking to me how similar the recommendations were across all of the different categories of support, whether it be CAA, whether it be CANAS, or the AAAs. I think we're all seeing the same thing, Senator Lesser, and that leads me to be very hopeful that we can actually make some progress. Many of these recommendations have been things that area agencies on aging have been talking about for many years, and I think we're all encouraged by this task force and an opportunity to finally get to make some changes. I will caution, I know it seems that two-tiered system, the State Unit on Aging getting the funds, which is a requirement again through the Older Americans Act, it has to come to a state organization and then go to the AAAs. Contracting processes with the State Unit on Aging are equally slow to the payment processes. So I would encourage the CANASP members to think in terms of it is with lightning speed that the nonprofit AAAs can work on contracts. I know that there have been some issues and negotiations and discussions in some regions between the AAA and the ENP. There are things that we can work on both sides related to communications. We've shown that with, in many of our partnerships. It is a two-way street. The ENPs are desperate to get more money in that unit cost because of the increases in labor, food, and gas and fuel. And the AAAs are always looking at, well, we need to get X number of meals out the door. So if we increase the unit cost, we will have fewer meals available in the community. So there is that dance, that negotiation that takes place. I think the AAAs can take a look at starting that negotiation earlier so that we have a contract in place by October 1, at least, 2 weeks before the start of a new fiscal year. And that's something I think we're very willing to work on. So just thanks to everyone for the work. And I think we've identified across the board some really positive changes that could make the program much stronger.
Great. Aaron, did you have questions about any of the recommendations? I mean, again, there's some specific things that, we could go through them one by one. But do you have questions for either Bill or for Joel?
No, I understand all of the recommendations. So thank you.
Okay, great. And
Senator,
excuse me.
oh,
yeah.
sorry.
This is Michelina. I haven't figured out how to raise my hand on the telephone.
Okay,
and I don't mean to break the flow of what you're talking about. Obviously, is so complicated. But can you save me a couple of minutes at the end?
Sure, we'll come back to you.
Comments from the field.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Maureen, I saw you.
Oh, Senator Lesser, I just I thought that you and Representative Gilchrist would like to know that pre-COVID, CANASP did begin to meet with the AAAs jointly, and we began talking about a lot of these things. COVID kind of threw a wrench in us meeting, and then during the RFP, we agreed not to meet because there was just conflicts of interest everywhere once the RFP went out. But we did have an open line of community, and I believe that we still do, by the way. I didn't mean to say that we don't. We had a nice open line of conversation, and we did have more meetings planned to get together and discuss a lot of the details of the things that are within our concerns. And we did, believe it or not, have some input on the RFP. It's a dance because the RFP is supposed to exclude future bidders and present contracted people. But we did have an audience with them, which is what started our meetings, where we did give them our concerns on the process and the application. So I just wanted you two to be aware that, we had done work together in the past, and I believe we can continue to do that. And certainly Aaron and the state unit, Aaron used to be an ENP. So, I think we have good grounds to get a lot of these things done.
Great. Maureen, did you have something?
I did. I wanted to make sure that Michelina had an opportunity to speak. So we will certainly, Michelina, I'll keep my remarks very brief. I also wanted to second what Joel had said with respect to our ability to work together and our real enthusiasm for doing so. I think we all embarked on a real intentional building of that communication bridge because we realized, how important it was that we were all on the same page. So Joel, thank you so much for saying that. That was my first comment this morning. And then the second thing with respect to CANASP was I wanted to just highlight how well done I felt their recommendations were, because I thought that they captured very well a lot of the consumer perspective. They talk about quality, they talk about quantity, it talked about the availability of meals statewide. They talked about just waiting list and the real nuts and bolts of this program. And they also, again, captured the push and the pull and the interreliance, wrongfully so in some respects, between the Connecticut Home Care Program and the Title III program. You know, there's a really kind of an unholy alliance there where, you know, shortfalls on one will impact the other. So I really appreciated CANASP's summation of a lot of these issues. You know, the pieces that, in my personal opinion, that have been really wonderful for this particular task force are the things that you as legislators have more purview over than we can ever hope to. So, for example, again, that push-pull between the Connecticut Home Care Program and the Older Americans Act program. You have the opportunity and the wherewithal to bring those folks to the table to talk more about how we can look at this more holistically and realistically, understanding that, as we've said from the beginning, the Older Americans Act funding will never support multiple meals per day. It was never intended to do that. It was never intended to be the end all be all of nutrition services for older adults. You have the ability, where we don't, to bring OPM to the table, to talk about this advance. And, you know, Senator or Representative Gilchrist, I appreciated your making the connection to LIHEAP. We know that there are these opportunities and this creative thinking out of the box. You know, just because the Older Americans Act funding has always sort of been segmented in this way doesn't relinquish the state's responsibility to make things work for consumers and providers. So you folks are in the unenviable yet important position of being able to move mountains that have been very difficult, if not impossible, for us. So I just wanted to, you know, in that small way, recognize CANASP for the work that they're doing, and to thank you folks for convening the task force, because we really are all in this together, and I think we all have a valuable role to play. And I think I'd just like to wrap up by saying that, you know, what we need to continue to get to and hold as our guiding kind of North Star is the feedback of consumers like Michalina, and providers who are trying to enhance the overall experience for our older adults, because that is really the end of the day goal here. You know, it isn't about necessarily you know, one program versus another. It's how do we maximize the number of meals in the community? How do we ensure that we are getting those meals to the people who really need them, and keeping provider infrastructure that is whole for a growing number of older adults in Connecticut? And no one program is going to be able to do that on its own as an island, as a silo. And so if there's one thing that comes out of this task force, I hope it is that sense of interreliance that we're all going to need to develop and invest in, quite honestly. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Well said. Michalina, I think this would be a great time for you to weigh in if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for all the amazing work you've done. I've read all this stuff, and it just boggles my mind as to how you can keep your head wrapped around this stuff. But again, thank you for so much work, and I can't quite express all this to the clients in a way that they really understand. But if they knew all of this, I would hope that they would be far more grateful than I often feel they are. I, as an individual, cannot put gratefulness or a sense of thankfulness into people. I wish I could. But as I see in the congregate setting, which obviously someone in Meals on Wheels at home delivery doesn't see, and as you can probably imagine, I have basically become the complaint department. So sometimes my meal doesn't settle well, but I do listen, and I encourage people to talk to me. And I think the things that have come in this last, say, month that have struck me and have heard like repeatedly or different things is again, maybe about half of the time the meals are warm. Other times, a lot of the food is cold or tepid, which is to an older person isn't usually satisfying. Again, we had a couple of times where the Brussels sprouts and the broccoli were hard as rocks, and a whole bunch of stuff like that got dumped. We had a couple of times when there were pretty drastic substitutions to the meals, which, you know, and again, this goes back to gratefulness. I mean, this is subsistence. This is sustaining, you know, food for people. And I wish they would think of it that way. But again, I can't make them feel that way. And I was thinking in terms of when the menus go out, if maybe something on the menu, and again, I know people don't read, but we could always point back to it. Just say, you know, a little line that says meals may vary due to availability. You know, it's not a restaurant. It's, you know, it's not an individual order. And people just need to be grateful. Sometimes, you know, they get different things and they're not, like a chicken in a salad, and they will complain and say, oh, you know, it's not real chicken. It's like, well, it is kind of real chicken. It's like, yeah, but it's cut up deli meat or something like that. Or, you know, one lady one time had a salad that only had lettuce and tomato. There was no egg, chicken, cheese, nothing else in it for the chef salad. So, I mean, those are the things that I'm getting hit with day after day. And again, I wish I could make people understand how good they really have it through this program. But it's not an easy task.
Thank you, Michelina. First of all, that's so important because it underscores, you know, we can talk about the design of the program and find efficiencies and all that, but if people aren't willing to eat the food, then we're not accomplishing what we're setting out to do. And so, you know, making
and
sure.
The other thing you were talking about the donations and stuff like that. I mean, where I am in Stratford, they really don't, you know, they put $3 to $5 or whatever on the thing. And there's a thing there that says, you know, always appreciated, but like not mandatory kind of thing. And, you know, for that person that's on the borderline thinking about whether they should kick in or not, I mean, that just removes it totally. I mean, in my mind. And the other thing that you were talking about, why are there so many seniors now that seem to need the program, besides the obvious things that you all know, price of gasoline and food and stuff like that, you've got a huge amount of people that because of COVID, they were at that point of wondering whether they should retire or not. Well, they ended up retiring. So you've got a huge amount of baby boomers out there and discovering that they're not covered. Social Security isn't going to cover them. A lot of companies never had pension plans. So little by little, you're getting all these people into the population who aren't going to be able to go out and get a second job like every, you know, the people between 25 and 65 are able to do. Just a thought.
Thank you so much. Allison, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Michelina, thank you so much for those remarks. I think that's so poignant, and it actually could make a whole nother offshoot group to really discuss, you know, that perspective of the nutrition programs, and so appreciate that. And I know, you know, when we're talking about that area of plan development or the folks that we have on advisory councils or boards within any of our agencies on aging, that's a really great source of feedback. But it also brings to light the positive remarks that we hear as well. And I know that the nutrition providers hear wonderful stories as well, and you know, note to ourselves that maybe we need to, you know, focus on spreading those good comments as well. I know I've you know, worked with home delivered meal clients for the last 13 years, and certainly there are a lot of times where there are a lot of really positive stories, and it is a lot of times the benefit of having food for sustenance, but it's also just the appreciation of of the service and of somebody caring about them. And that is really the crux of all of the senior nutrition program. And so if we, collaboratively work on this, I'm so appreciative of what everybody else has said as well about the task force and the light that it's shown on some of these issues that have been discussed for many, many years. And I think if we can, say that we're maybe mending those areas and can then, look further to growth and betterment of the program. But I really appreciate everybody being here as well.
Okay, so moving to the questions about the decision-making process, planning for the December meeting. What I think makes sense is to have ADS respond to each of the recommendations that we've received, and then what we will do is at the next meeting, we will have an opportunity to review the ADS feedback, identify, sort of sequentially going through each of the recommendations we've received from the AAAs and from the, from Bill and from Joel, go through each of those recommendations and vote yay or nay. And also we can want to thank Michelina for her feedback as well, and we'll certainly talk about that as well. Does that sound like it makes sense? And I'd love to make sure, though, that we get an opportunity to hear back with enough time to, look at what ADS has to say. So maybe we could ask ADS, when do you think you could get those specific recommendations or the feedback to all of us?
I'll take it back to the rest of the team, and hopefully, no later than the end of the week, I'll have a sense of when we would be able to get those to you. But we will definitely aim for at least a week before the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Does that make sense for anybody? Does anybody else have other suggestions about how we move forward? And do you think that that's feasible? Is there a reason why we might not be able to do this in December? We can move to January if we need to, but love to get it done this year. Yeah, Joel. So you're.
No, I was just gonna say something to Michelina as well, but we're on to voting, so that's okay with me.
Okay. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, we will, as mentioned, 10 a.m. on the 19th. We will see you there. Just in time for the holidays, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your month. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.